When you think of the word scary, what do you think of? For me, I particularly think of horror games. I've always liked the idea of being thrown into a scary experience and having you be in the driver's seat as opposed to some dumb bimbo trying to survive a masked killer. So many classics have spawned from this genre. Silent Hill 2, Outlast, Fatal Frame, PT, the Clock Tower series, hell, even Five Nights at Freddy's was a breakthrough in the horror genre.
So the first night is never usually that bad in any of the games, so I'll play through.
But me personally, my favorite horror series has gotta be Resident Evil. A spooky series centering around cops in Raccoon City fighting evil monsters and jumping on Goombas in an anthology series full of classic adventures. Resident Evil 1, a spooky, lonely, claustrophobic game set in a creepy mansion as you let your imagination get the better of you. Resident Evil Village, a game with the mommiest mommy. But my personal favorite out of this amazing series has gotta be Resident Evil 4. This game changed the way we view Resident Evil today. The series went from being semi-realistic, with massive quotation marks, to straight up goofy and insane. You play as the returning Leon S. Kennedy, now a much more grizzled and stoic version of himself. But this time, we aren't trying to escape a city about to be nuked. No. This time, we have the goal of rescuing the President of the United States' daughter! But first we have to find her. I won't bore you with the rest of the story, but basically, Leon makes his way to a village that is seemingly normal, aside from the fact that they're burning one of his Policia pals alive. Leon makes his way around the village.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
She meets a shady-looking man by the name of Luis, gets infected with a parasite known as the Las Plagas, meets the fights a giant tadpole, kills a giant tadpole, fights a giant man, kills a giant man with the help of a wolf, locates Ashley and saves her, not without sexually harassing her first.
You pervert!
Leon and Ashley then try to escape the village, run into Luis again. Leon and Luis then defend the cabin from the angry villagers, not without Luis sexually harassing Ashley first. Leon and Ashley then make their way to a medieval castle. You still with me? Leon and Ashley run into a small man known as Salazar. Turns out Ashley is also infected with the virus. Ashley is then kidnapped. Leon fights some guys. Turns out Ada Wong from Resident Evil 2 is still alive, and Leon is just like, yo, that pussy still work? Luis reveals he knows how to cure them, then Luis fucking dies. Leon saves Ashley, some stupid fucking shit happens, I don't fucking know. Ashley gets kidnapped. Bugs! Jesus Christ. Now we're on an island, some outrageous shit happens. I pooped my pants! This is Leon's old mentor, and yes, this is his first appearance. Ashley is saved, Leon is saved, we're all fucking saved! Leon fights Lord Sadler, blows up Lord Sadler, and now the entire island's about to explode. Leon and Ashley escape, and Ashley wants to fuck. Would you believe me if I said this game was written in less than 3 weeks? Resident Evil 4 was also the first game in the series to remove fixed camera angles, in favor of the, at the time new, over-the-shoulder aiming. You still use tank controls in order to control Leon, but now aiming your gun has so much more depth to it. Before, you would aim in the general direction you wanted to fire at, and the game would do the rest. But not to worry. If you suck at aiming, there are some other ways to take out enemies. Leon has a few melee attacks he can perform on stunned enemies. These range from simple kicks to fucking suplexes. These new additions to the combat make dealing with enemies so much more fun. There's so much more depth to how you can approach the same situation. Maybe one time you aim for the hand, knocking any weapon they had on the ground. And maybe another time you aim for the legs instead, bringing them to the ground where you can then finish them with a melee attack. Or maybe you can skip all of that and aim for the balls instead. There are plenty of ways to kill enemies, even without directly hitting them. You only really start to notice these things on subsequent playthroughs, but nevertheless, it's just more options to how you want to go about the current situation. The only limit here is how much you're willing to experiment. Now, you didn't think I was going to forget about the Merchant, did you? Everyone that plays Resident Evil 4 ends up falling in love with the Merchant. In some ways, he's the most iconic character in the game. Seriously, you mention any line of his and instantly people know who you're talking about. He's just got that raspy British charm. The Merchant is easily one of the best new additions to the series. You can buy all sorts of new weapons and healing items from him, as well as upgrading your weapons, making them much better in combat. You can also sell almost any item in the game too. These include the little treasures you might find laying around the map. Some treasures can even be combined with others, increasing its worth. Now, I'm gonna let you in a little secret about this game. If you don't got money, you ain't getting far. Money is truly how the world goes round, and that's no different for Resident Evil 4. You better be collecting every last bag of money from those corpses. Because if you don't, I guess you like playing the game the hard way. The game is also surprisingly lengthy, especially for a Resident Evil game. For reference, the previous 3 games were all around 6 to 7 hours long, while Resident Evil 4 comes out to an impressive 15 hours. At the time, it was the longest in the series, and I'm only counting the main campaign here. But the interesting part about all of that is that it's still way more replayable than the previous titles. Capcom's like a family-run diner. You ordered takeout, but they're nice people, so they slip a little something extra in there free of charge. In fact, they slipped a lot of extra food. I only ordered RE4, but then when I opened the bag, I saw I got the Mercenaries, Separate Ways, Assignment Ada, unlockable guns, and costumes all for free. There's so much substance that it feels like a waste not to play the extra modes. But even ignoring all the side content, the main game is still extremely fun to replay. The game has a ranking system, influencing players to aim for a higher score. There are also routes you can take that lead to a completely different outcome than if you took the opposite one instead. And for all the masochists watching, there are also a plethora of ways to kill Leon as well. I really like how they do not go easy on him just because he's the protagonist. Leon gets decapitated, devoured, melted, crushed, blown up, and face melted. This man takes all this abuse and still has the time to crack a few jokes along the way.
Your right hand comes off?
Leon is easily one of the coolest protagonists of the early 2000s. He's got the cool jacket, the sad backstory, and emo hair. Can you even name anyone cooler? Super Mario, maybe. Most of the characters in this game radiate some form of radical coolness! Luis is the average European, Ada is hot, and Ashley is... well, she's something. I actually don't mind Ashley at all. There are times where escorting Ashley feels slow and, God forbid, unfun! But those moments were far and few between. I know some people also dislike the section where you play as Ashley, but personally, I found it to be pretty cool. You have no weapons, no way to defend yourself. The only thing you can do is run and hide. It's a homage to the days of old school Resident Evil. And if that wasn't obvious enough, the Japanese version of RE4 even had fixed camera angles just for this section. Resident Evil 4 was one of the most influential games of the modern era. You see games taking inspiration from it even today. It's my favorite Resident Evil and one of my favorite games in general. Despite its age, it still holds up quite well. And in cases where it does show its age, such as its graphics, Capcom has you covered. Resident Evil 4 has received numerous releases, to the point that you can play it on almost any device. With the constant re-releases of RE4, along with it came HD versions of the game, with widescreen support and improved graphics. And even in the case where Capcom falls short, the game still remains up to date through unofficial sources. When a company neglects their games, modders are sure to take up where they left off. And fortunately for RE4, both groups still frequently touch up the game. And with the recent series of remakes of the first 3 Resident Evil games, I can only assume that Resident Evil 4 will be getting one as well.
Resident Evil 4 established itself as not only one of the best horror games of all time, but as one of the best games ever made. It's a highly praised game that's universally loved by almost anyone who's played it, including myself. So when I heard the game would be getting a remake, well, I was confused. You see, for a nearly 20-year-old game, RE4 aged really well, so it didn't really strike me as a game that needed a remake, and a remake it got. My god, this is beautiful. You got updated characters, updated gameplay, updated graphics, everything got a buff, and I mean everything. Man, this gotta be the hardest porn modders have worked since the Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
Just excuse me for just a second. The story pretty much stayed the same with minor tweaks here and there, but most changes came in the form of cuts. Capcom went into this remake with a more serious and realistic approach, meaning that most of the goofy and over-the-top nonsense that the original was known for wouldn't really fit so well with the tone the remake was going for. As a result, a whole lot of content was cut. You got some pretty small things missing here and there, such as the boulders, the swinging axes, the cable cars, the lasers, and that one part with the truck to name a few. However, there are quite a few major changes too. The bulldozer ride and the Salazar robot chase were completely removed, as well as the U3 boss fight. While I do think experiencing these in the remake would have been pretty fun, it does clean up the game a bit by taking out the unnecessary shit and making progression in the game feel a lot smoother. Leon himself had a tiny bit of a change too, coming off as slightly more mature than before, but not by that much. After all, we're still given his iconic cheesy one-liners, including the single greatest line in all of gaming history.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
That being said, a fair share of additions were also made. Graphically, the game looks incredible, but that's to be expected considering how great some of the last few Resident Evil games have looked. As far as the actual gameplay and combat goes, the remake got some major improvements. While I wouldn't necessarily call the original's gameplay completely outdated, it definitely pales in comparison to how most modern games feel. I mean, most gamers aren't going to want to use tank controls in their 2023 AAA video games, so a complete gameplay revamp was much needed. For starters, we now have a free-moving camera. It's just really nice not having that camera be locked in whatever direction Leon's facing anymore. You also don't have to stop dead in your tracks whenever you want to aim and shoot at enemies, which is super useful during those situations where you're being overwhelmed by ganados and want to move away while still dealing some damage to them. A couple new gameplay mechanics were also implemented, such as the ability to block attacks using your knife, and also crouching, which allows for a more stealthy style of gameplay if you're into that. Ashley's health bar was completely removed and replaced with her getting knocked instead. But honestly, I prefer this over the health bar because that way, I don't actually have to use any of my heals on her. Alright, now enough about the gameplay because I'd like to focus more on the characters for a little bit. I've already talked about how Leon went from being pretty goofy to being goofy with a tiny hint of seriousness to him, and as far as some of the other characters go, well, Krauser was pretty much the same, Mendez has the Undertaker fit, and Ada had a controversial voice. Most characters just kinda got pretty small adjustments that didn't really do much for them or the game, but Ashley was one character that seriously benefited from this remake. Many people disliked Ashley in the original. While I personally didn't mind her, I can definitely see why some people did. After all, she didn't really do much of anything except get in the way and scream a lot. But the remake, well, let's just say they definitely gave her some enhancements. If you're gonna have a character tag alongside you for half the game, you might as well make them good, and that they did. She has a lot more personality in this one, and I feel like she interacted with Leon a lot more too, which definitely helped build up the chemistry between them. It felt like they were more like companions or partners rather than a lost child and the random guy that found her in the middle of a Walmart supercenter. I really enjoyed her presence because she just felt more like a real human, and that chemistry with Leon was just too fucking good. No character though had more of an upgrade than Luis. As much as I liked him, to me he always felt like a character that just kinda came and went without having too much of an impact. He's given a lot more screen time in the remake and was a lot more involved in the game in general, helping Leon with things like the minecart segment and fighting the two giants. Luis grew on me as a character, so when he ultimately died, his death hit me a lot harder. I already knew it would happen, but I couldn't help but feel slightly shocked and sad when it did. Of course, it didn't affect me nearly as much as Mike's death, but it still shook me a bit. One character with little to no importance to the actual storyline is this good old Brexit geezer. This bloke will sell you all sorts of illegal contraband he smuggled into the country. Guns, attachments, explosives, bulletproof vests, drugs, you name it. My favorite thing about him is that in the remake he gives you these side quests to do. Completing these side quests will give you spinels, which can be used to buy items off the special store. Rather than only having blue medallions to shoot, you got some golden eggs to look for, some rats to hunt, and a few mini bosses here and there. Now, I normally don't do side quests in other games because I find them to be boring most of the time and the rewards just aren't worth the effort. But in RE4, they are pretty quick quests that'll take you like 5 minutes at most, or they're just mini bosses that are pretty fun to fight. And those spinels will get you some useful items that are locked out of the merchant's normal shop. You'll also get the shooting range, the charms, and some other things I'm not going to get into. Now, what do I personally think about the game?
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
Resident Evil 4 Remake is a masterpiece. I genuinely don't know which of the two games I prefer. Despite the chunks of content being scrapped, the remake still felt like a very complete game. In fact, the game progressed so smoothly that I hadn't even realized how much had been missing till after I'd already beaten it. For me, most of the new features made up for the losses. Characters like Luis and Ashley had better character development. Visually, the game looks stunning. I mean, there really aren't many complaints I have with it, if any at all. I strongly recommend playing both the original and the remake because while it may be the same game at its core, it still feels like you're getting two different experiences that are each worth playing.
"2023. I'll never forget it. It was the year when those grisly eliminations occurred in Mega City. Soon after, the news was out to the whole island revealing that it was the fault of a cracked squad with superhuman aim. The squad traveled to another location on the map, Frenzy Fields, and hit the peaceful little farm with a devastating blow, claiming it as theirs and taking all its loot, not taking any chances. Another squad had seen them and formed a contingency plan to sterilize the cracked squad. They would team up with a third party, a bannable offense, but a necessary one. Unfortunately, they didn't take into account that one of the teammates from the cracked squad had recorded them and used it as evidence in a report to Epic Games. However, as it turns out, the cracked squad had aimbot hacks installed. A self-report. Soon all three of the squads were banned, the hackers getting a perma-ban and losing all their skins. For all intents and purposes, the squad was finished,